Hi, everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Scarsdale info session for proposed village budget for 2024-25. Thank you, trustees and mayor and Shilpa, who is our proposal chair for this, and trustee Brew on Zoom. And I guess we should just go ahead and start. Great. Yeah. Okay.
So I'll just start by saying, this is my second year doing this, so I was a little bit more familiar with the process than last year, even though it's still like the amount of detail that you guys have to, work through is extremely impressive and a little overwhelming to me at times, but I just wanted to thank you for obviously all of the extremely in-depth thought that you put into this to the village budget. So I have prepared some questions as I've emailed you guys. I don't think we need to go through all of them, but I certainly, they're really just questions that I had as I was listening in on all of your meetings. And this year, they're much less focused on, specific funding requests and more, I think, process oriented as we've had, as you guys know, there've been some changes in the way the process has played out. So just in terms of my first questions about the general budget, my very first question is, I think we're only at a third pass at this point, right? So when do you guys anticipate having a tentative budget in place? That's probably an easy one, but I'd love to hear.
I think we're actually quite close. We had our third pass budget discussion last week. So far in the process, we really have heard from departments that are having any key changes, and what we've seen is that really from an operating perspective, we're not looking at any drastic increases in the operating budget apart from those non-discretionary items such as pensions, healthcare. We also have some settled contracts with salary increases that were already pre-scheduled. So we had already anticipated those, but we really had more in-depth conversation philosophically about our capital projects. The board made a really great effort last year to put funding into catching up on certain expenses. So we talked about vehicles, we talked about roadways, and I think we want to have similar conversations as we're getting close to nailing down the tentative budget in discussing the funding sources for different capital projects. We've talked a lot about use of fund balance. We've talked about the use of debt, and I think we're getting really close. We do need to file the tentative budget by March 20th, and I'm confident that we will be done before then.
Great, okay. So that brings me to my second question, which is about the date that you're filing the tentative budget. My understanding was the tentative budget was originally scheduled to be presented tomorrow evening. Has that officially changed to the 20th now?
So the 20th is the statutory deadline that we would need to meet in New York State village law to file the budget file. We are looking at probably early next week to have it filed. So that was originally the plan, but as we've gotten through this process, I call the budget schedule a living document. As we have more conversations and new topics come up, discussions about projects, maybe the board needs additional information on certain projects, we've made the process fluid. So we wanted a little more time to make sure that we're really capturing all those changes that were being discussed at the prior budget work sessions.
Okay, and then for the 20th, will that meeting be open to public comments? And, I'm asking about, our process of putting together a consensus statement from the League of Women's Voters. Are we going to have the chance to present our consensus statement at the March 20th meeting?
So the March 20th deadline isn't necessarily the date that we would be discussing the tentative budget. That's the date that it has to be filed with the clerk's office so that it can be delivered to the board after the filing. We are still working out which date in the month of March we would have the official presentation on the tentative budget, but it would be publicly announced, posted on the website, and we would welcome any comment.
Okay,
I mean,
that's great.
This goes a little bit to how we do budgeting, I think a little bit differently. I mean, every municipality has their own way, but I've always enjoyed how collaborative the process is between staff and the board. I think the way this is set up, these are deadlines so that the board does have input. In some municipalities, the budget officer, being manager, administrator, and the treasurer, put together a tentative budget without a lot of input from the elected officials That's why you're required, the clerk is required to present it actually to the board by the 31st. And then you have to vote on it, have a public hearing, and then have to vote on it before May 1st. If you don't take any action and change anything by May 1st, the tentative budget automatically becomes the final budget. So we are late perhaps to the original schedule, but we're right on time as far as I'm concerned. And I appreciate that we are still doing additional work trying to refine the budget, and it'll be a better product for it.
I couldn't agree more. I think the collaboration is critically important, and it's great. If you need to delay, you need to delay. Okay, so I'm gonna skip the next question because I think I already know the answer, but, how do you, I know there've been a lot of discussions about the unassigned fund balance and the assigned fund balance in this year's budget. How does it generally compare to other similar towns and villages in terms of usage? Do you guys have a sense of like, are we, extremely conservative, extremely, liberal with our usage? What are your thoughts on that?
So in accordance with our auditor's recommendations, we're really falling right in what's appropriate and healthy for a village our size, especially a community that has large infrastructure needs. We are a little bit of an older community, and we've seen expensive capital repairs that need to occur. So the 15 to 20% is considered healthy according to our auditors. And we haven't done an exact comparison with other communities. It would be difficult to really get an apples to apples because of how money might be classified in other organizations. They also might have a different level of service or a way of accounting for things. So we haven't done research to compare other communities in Westchester, but our auditors do service many communities in Westchester and the greater New York metropolitan area.
Okay. But the auditors are from the village, is great. What are the actual implications if we don't comply with these guidelines of the 15 to 20% usage of the unassigned fund balance? I mean, are there any like
No, it's
penalties
a
or-
board policy. But it's there for a reason. And the idea being, if we were to fall below it, I sure hope that we had a plan to get back to it. And as we are now above it, we're looking at ways, for example, the $3 million, we're looking at ways to assign that probably, which will happen in the next week, specifically to stormwater improvements, which are really important. And it doesn't mean we're spending it today, but we want to make sure that we have a plan for the next couple of years so that we will get to that fund balance policy.
Gotcha. Okay, so now, since the third pass is now in compliance with the New York State tax cap, do you guys envision any scenarios where we might still exceed the tax cap before we reach a tentative budget?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I don't, that's not what we're trying to accomplish, but we're still looking at what is catch up, what is non-recurring. We want to be really careful. And I would point everyone to the piece in LOHA today about Carmel.
Yes, it's pretty disturbing.
Fortunately, we're not any close to that, but I think we need to be very careful. If we were to look at all the deferrals that have been made and all the infrastructure needs that we have, our fund balance doesn't look as big anymore. It really doesn't. I mean, we can borrow for all of these things, and for things that have very long useful lives, it's not a bad idea to do that. But we can't forget, this is not like a residential home mortgage where we can do an interest-only product. These things have to get paid back. They're amortized over a certain number of years. So taxes will be increased by them regardless. And if we start to borrow for everything or use fund balance for everything, there's a purpose for both of those levers, absolutely. But if we start to do that too much, you're going to start to see ramifications. And I think Carmel is a very good example, unfortunately, of that.
Yeah, that was a very disturbing story. I really feel for that town. Okay, let's see. I guess, can we go through the infrastructure needs that are both just at a very high level, included in this year's budget and, and not included, that really are a high priority to you guys? Just a very high level summary of what you think is being addressed this year from the infrastructure and what's really not and is very important. So
we, consistent with last year, we're planning to do more paving. Paving has been a priority. The board has asked that we do a 3-year catch up, and we're going to be looking to do 8 to 10 miles this year. That's consistent with the work that we've done over the past year, and that won't include, that's just what the village is doing. That doesn't include paving that would be completed by Con Edison. So we're looking forward to that. We do have a relatively large project in there scheduled for debt issuance for the repainting of the Heathcote Road Bridge over the Heathcote bypass. So when I had first seen that project, I said, wow, that's a lot of money for painting, right? It does seem to be a lot for paint, but it's not really just paint. It's a rust prevention process. There needs to be sandblasting of the original paint, and it needs to remove all the rust so that new paint can be applied, and there's environmental remediation efforts that need to be taken into account when completing that project, and that's where a lot of the cost is coming from. So I just thought it would be important to highlight that, because that is actually a very important project, and paint doesn't necessarily describe that. So I wanted to touch base upon that. We also have a placeholder about money set aside for village-wide stormwater improvements. This has been something that the board has wanted to focus on, and we had a really great work session on December 5th, where we discussed 8 different projects that we have our consultants working on right now. They're in various stages, but we're hoping that over the next year, we can get the results of the study work that they're doing so that we can have designs and have a better and more accurate number going forward of what we expect to spend on stormwater. We also have money in this year's budget and capital for the design work for the pool. And we will expect there will be, expenses related to construction in the out years for the pool. But, we won't have as refined of a number yet until we see the results of that design process. And we haven't even really embarked on it yet. Now that we have the construction management owners rep services in place, we're going to move to the next stages in getting an architect. So we will see expenses that are more accurate in the future related to what we anticipate spending on the pool. And then also, we've had conversations about a catch up on recreation projects. We definitely had some great conversations. Superintendent Brian Gray had come and presented an overview of all of our recreation facilities and how much money has put into them over the years. He came to us on, I want to say January 16th, I believe that's the date, and he put together a great presentation. I highly recommend everyone take a look at it. And other expenses that we're going to have that are not necessarily reflected in the schedule that you'll see in the third pass budget, but we will eventually need to have conversations about this building that we're in, as we know that some of it is a bit weathered, and there's expenses that we're putting into it in various places, and we will need to do a more serious either renovation or replacement in the future. And we're hoping that over the next year, we'll have some cost estimates of what it might take to do some more serious work to this building, but that would be farther into the future. And then lastly, I just want to say we've used ClearGov, which is an amazing tool to put together a digital budget book. And it's particularly great for capital. Thanks to our treasurer for putting that tool together. If you take a look at the capital improvement schedule in the digital budget book, you can get there by going to scarsdale.com and going to the treasurer's homepage. You can really click and see so much detail for each project. It includes pictures, cost estimates, cost breakdowns for the outer years, and really detailed project descriptions. So I think that's something that's really improved our capital process overall.
And just jumping on that, first of all, I'm surprised I didn't see any laughs or smiles when Village Hall was mentioned, because the league's report every year has talked about the deferrals in Village Hall, so I appreciate that. And we're very well aware of those. But I think this budget process has been exciting in some ways from a long-term planning perspective. Rec is a great example. Superintendent Gray was actually visibly happy that we asked him to do it. It doesn't mean everything's getting fixed right away. It actually may mean some things look worse in the short term. For example, our tennis courts. What we've done with our tennis courts over the years is we just surface sometimes when the balls hit it, they don't bounce really the same way. We've been doing that for years. If you ask Superintendent Greg, when's the last time we really overhauled an all-weather court? We've done some of our Hartrue courts. I don't think he has an answer. If you ask him when's the last time we really did our baseball and softball fields, he doesn't have an answer. He's been here, and there's a gap in between, but he's been here for over 20 years, and he's not aware of when that's been done. So we're trying to catch up on these things. The tennis courts, I don't believe we are going to do the crack repair this year. Our hope is to work particularly with the middle school tennis courts with the school district to redo them with post-tension concrete, do them the right way so that they're in great shape for many years to come. That is something we could potentially borrow for. So these are all things that we're discussing. Also, playgrounds are part of this. We have too many playgrounds where the manufacturers are out of business, where we can't get parts for them anymore. So I second what the acting manager said. Please look at that report if you haven't already. It's great, it's comprehensive, and it shows by ranking of condition, by age, by size, by everything of our playgrounds. That's the mentality that we're trying to continue with our road paving program, with our fleet replacement program in DPW, trying to figure out not only what the impact on budgets are today, but what they are for tomorrow and for at least 5 years out.
If I could just add, this board has done a really good job of strategically planning out these catch-ups. You know, this year we have the benefit of, we're not talking about the vehicles and fleets because we've already successfully caught up over the last 2 budget cycles. Same thing about paving. We spent so much time last year setting up a plan to catch up and to be on track. And now we're seeing the benefits of that. So our next step is stormwater and parkway. So it's a very methodical, strategic approach that we're taking.
Great. Just my last question about process. It reminded me when you mentioned the Heathcote bypass, the Heathcote Bridge painting project. I think I heard in your previous sessions that that is one project that you're gonna issue a bond, like you're gonna raise funds to fund through a bond issuance. How do you guys make that determination? Or, you know, what are the rules around that? Just so, you know, we're more educated on what that process is.
Well, there are very strict rules. You know, we have a bond council that advises us on which projects are eligible for bonding, based on the type of project, the estimated useful life. So, you know, as a general rule, if there is a future useful life, we try to bond to match the expense in the periods that are going to be benefited. So,
All right, but there is some council that needs to discuss this, so can you present to them, say, we're hoping to have a bond to repair XYZ?
so I certainly call them as needed throughout the year. When we're working on budgets, I have shown them our entire capital project schedule, gone over all of the projects to get their opinions as to what can be considered for our debt issuance.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. All right, so just moving on to, unless, are you guys allowed to ask questions? Should you? Okay, gotcha. All right. Okay, so moving on to some of the capital improvement line items that we reviewed in this year's general funds budget. I wanted to understand, I know that last year there was a very thoughtful plan put in place for the paving and the road repairs. I think you guys allocated a certain amount for last year, and now there's one for this year. How much of last year's budget was actually used? I mean, have you used all of it, or have you gone over, under?
For the paving,
Yeah, for paving.
we used all of the money that was assigned in the current year for the paving and all of the money that was assigned for the catch-up as well.
Okay,
So, yes,
So
we're
yes,
right on
yeah.
track to,
great.
and our engineering department is, you know, happy to spend all of that money.
Yeah.
We did,
I think we're all happy about that.
yes, we did just over 11.5 miles of paving last year, and then another 3.11 miles of paving done by Con Edison. So overall, it's more than we've seen in prior years where we had only done 4 or 5 miles per year.
And as a general, I mean, it doesn't have to be about every line, but how much of these allocations that you make year over year, let's just talk about last year, are actually used? You know, like, is it you generally use all of the money, or you generally use 50%, or do you have any sense of that?
Money that's sent to the capital.
The money that's in your budget, like allocated for capital expenditures year over year, how much of that money is typically used, and how much is carried over into the?
Well, we have very strict reporting requirements. Every time something, money is sent to our capital fund, each of those projects is tracked individually for all of the expenses and revenue until the project is complete. At the end of each year, in our audited financial statements, there's a complete project length schedule for our capital fund, where it lists the projects by class, the total expenses to date, and the total revenue to date.
So everything's used.
If it's
Or
not
it's
used,
tracked.
it's tracked. If it's not used, we come back to the board to get approval to move it to a different project, generally within that same classification, or it goes back to the general fund, depending on what the board decides.
And when does that happen? At the end of the fiscal year?
End of the fiscal year during budget adjustments.
And we're also really careful. I mean, if borrowing is the fund source, or if it's fund balance, perhaps, I think we can be a little bit more flexible. We would never put something in the budget we don't anticipate using. But for example, a fire apparatus, some of the DPW equipment for sanitation, the lead time is incredible. It's like a year out at least. But we still have to make the approval and make sure we have the monies available before they will even allow us to get into the queue. When it comes to general fund, because it does impact the tax levy, we want to make sure there's a good faith attempt that we know that we can try to use all of it in a year. But obviously things happen, staffing issues happen, contractor delays. But as the treasurer said, everything is reported and the assigned fund balances are listed so that we know what monies are available for that project for the coming year, whether we need to potentially add more. We can always reassign the money if necessary for other projects, should something happen in the project not happen. The money is always used, let's put it that way.
Okay, perfect. And actually, I did remember there was one question, I don't even know if it's on this list, but about the general process that I did want to ask that's about this year. How much of your budget process and, becoming tax cap compliant, et cetera, has been influenced this year by what's happening on the school budget? I'm just curious, like how much of an interplay there is, even just in your minds or hearts.
So I think from their perspective, it really shouldn't. We're always trying to create the best budget that makes sense for the village and for our residents going forward. I would be lying if I said it doesn't at least come into my head, because I watch every school budget meeting to my wife's delight. And so I definitely consider that, but at the same time, we have to make the best decisions for the village. We have to make sure that what we're doing is not only setting us up for today, but for tomorrow. I don't want to go back to Carmel again, but I will, which is, we can't just play tricks with tools like fund balance or borrowing to make us look good today, because there are always implications for future years. So I think our partnership with the schools are great, and I appreciate all the work that they're doing, but they really are two independent processes.
Okay, so going back to sort of line items. I was just curious, and maybe I should have read about this somewhere in the documentation, but is the Hutchinson River drainage project? I didn't hear anything about it in the meeting, so I was just curious what it is.
It's not a village specific project. It's something that we joined a lot of other municipalities in the area years ago, understanding that we have water issues, understanding that we have water infiltration issues, particularly in parts of Scarsdale where they saw water going into the sanitary sewers and then backing up into their houses. So this has been a priority for many years. I don't think it's really a priority now in terms of stormwater and what the implications are. Unfortunately, as that project, and we were paying our pro rata share, kind of progressed and the engineering work was done, it was realized that the project as it is today will not help Scarsdale as much as we originally hoped. It's mostly going to help further downstream. With that being said, we took a little bit of a step back from that project. Our superintendent is coordinating with New Rochelle to try to do our own project. It'll be a smaller scope, but it will have a lot more impact for our residents and for what happens with Scarsdale. So indirectly, we are still looking at it. The project itself was about dredging, cleaning the stream, making sure water was finding its way out of Scarsdale. And a lot of planning has to happen because, of course, there's implications to other communities downstream, just like we are affected by things further upstream. And it's the same thing in the Bronx River side. I don't know if anyone's seen, but when there's heavy rains recently, the Bronx River fills up pretty quickly. If we have pipes going in there, where does our water go? So we can have the best system in the whole world. This really has to be a collaborative effort on a higher level. And that's what we're also working on, not so successfully at the moment, but trying to get the county and the state to really take this on a little bit more strongly, trying to get them to work with us to coordinate this so that we can have improvements for everyone.
So that, brings up the whole topic of stormwater. So I'm gonna skip ahead to some of my questions about that. I know you guys have already mentioned it and Mayor Rest just discussed it at a high level just now, but my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is that there are no funds allocated in this year's budget specifically addressing stormwater. Is that correct?
No, there are,
Oh, there are. Okay.
the current fiscal year.
Yeah.
And no, there are, that's for, well, I'll let, it's for more design work at the moment, because that has to be done before we can actually go forward with any plans.
That's correct. Okay, so there are funds allocated simply to the design process. So what is, what is
Actually,
the,
I'm sorry, let me just. We have money every year, and we certainly have money this fiscal year for camera work, for cleanouts, for routine maintenance of our stormwater system. Like that continues every year, that's in there this year. We're talking bigger picture, bigger projects, how can we improve our system, then it's just design work.
okay, I was talking about that.
Okay.
Just.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
But thanks for the
Yeah.
clarification. So just in layman's terms, could you guys give us a high level understanding of what maybe like the 5-year plan is shaping up to be with, in terms of stormwater? Just because I know that the whole town is very interested in this topic.
How much money do we have?
I don't know.
No, I'm serious, I'm serious, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. I think our superintendent of public works and our engineer have done a good job of prioritizing where they think the monies can be spent to have the greatest impact. If we had unlimited funds, I would say, let's just attack every possible project, let's keep going. But it is a priority, and they have December 5th was the meeting.
Yes.
They did lay out the first kind of set of projects that are currently being worked on from an engineering and design perspective, that we absolutely, assuming that the design work and the engineering reports come back and say, yes, this will be helpful, we'll move forward with them as quickly as we can.
And some of those areas that we were looking at are Catherine Road, Griffin Avenue, Brookby Road, Brighton, Chesterfield, Cushman and Willow. Just those are some areas where we've seen repeat issues. So naturally, those are some of the areas that we're looking at first as far as the engineering work.
Great, okay, and when does this design, when will this information be available for you guys to?
So once the design work has been finished, it's not all going to be happening at the same time. It'll be in stages for the different projects. So, maybe 3 projects are getting looked at first in 1 year, and then the next 3 projects. The results of that study work that's done would come back to the village board of trustees, because they'll need to be authorizing the funds that are going to be spent on making those actual design improvements. So we could anticipate future meetings on this. When we're going to have the results of the studies, I don't have that exact date yet. I can certainly circle back with our public works department.
Not necessary. That's cool. Okay, so my last set of questions, but first of all, do we have the full hour, or do we have, well, you guys can tell me, is this a 30-minute meeting or an hour?
We booked at least an hour.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I just wanted to be sensitive to the time. Okay, so my last set of questions is really just about, some of your recurring expenses, how you determine which expenses are recurring and which ones are one-time expenses. But before I even go into sort of that process, from my understanding, the biggest expense, I mean, year over year, and certainly this year is no no exception to your budget, is your fixed, human resource costs. So your, obviously just salaries, but also your pension and healthcare costs, which are ramping up aggressively. Is there, besides, actually, reducing resources, I'm not talking about that, but specifically on the pension and healthcare costs, which do keep ramping up, is there any control that you as a village have over this, or is this just completely out of your ability to influence?
We do not have any discretion over the increases in these expenses. They, the pension increases come from the New York State retirement system, and we're, obligated to adjust accordingly once they put out those increases in the rates. Same with, we're on the night shift plan. So when New York State puts out those premium increases, we don't have any say in how they get adjusted. Something that I do want to highlight, just we tend to see a lot of expenses that are put upon us by New York State. And something that we were interested in, and actually NICOM, the New York Conference of Mayors, has been a really big supporter of, is pushing the state to increase AIM funding. That's the aid and incentives to municipalities. That is pretty much unrestricted funding. We get about $48,000 a year from this program. And something that we've noticed, and all the communities pretty much in the state have noticed, is that there hasn't been an increase in nearly 15 years, which we've only seen an increase in our expenses that are passed down to us through the state in various ways, including unfunded mandates. So we are really hoping that that'll be something that's looked at in the future as a way to help offset some of our expenses year to year, because that really is what the AIM funding was designed for. It was a way to to revenue share money that's being received by the state and providing it to the municipalities to help with those year over year increases that we're seeing across the board in all of our expenses. But pension, healthcare, our personnel costs, that's always the biggest cost, and that's pretty consistent with our municipal peers.
And I think it's important to note, and I tried to say this at our last budget meeting, was that our tax cap is 3.57%. If you add up the increases that we are being told we have to pay in insurance, whether it be health insurance, property insurance, and pension costs, that comes out to 3.77%. So we're already underwater in a way before we even start in terms of trying to stay within the tax cap.
That really hit me when you said it at the last meeting. I'm curious as to what is the way around this? Like, I mean, this seems like an intractable problem that will continue to increase year over year. So there'll be, unless we just massively, go over our tax cap year over year, is there any way that from a budget perspective, without just having to slash, is there any way that other than that to address these increasing costs?
And the hope is the state will come up with more money, particularly for infrastructure needs. Hopefully we can get some more federal money for infrastructure needs. The formula for the tax cap, right? One of the inputs is inflation, which sounds great, but it's the greater of inflation or 2%. In an inflationary environment, it's pretty hard to stay within that. I mean, the village, even before the tax cap was enacted, stayed within the tax cap for many, many years. And one of the things that was done was deferral. We could continue doing that. We could use more of our fund balance. There are tools to stay within the tax cap. The question is, again, in terms of long-term planning, what does that mean for the next 5 years? To look out further, what are the implications for not having fund balance, for having too much debt service? You start to look at those things, you start to look at a model of the implication on tax rates going forward. It's ugly if you really aren't prudent, which is not always, we all want to stay within the tax cap. We all would like to have zero tax increase, right? I live here. I don't want to pay more in taxes. So this is really about trying to find the most efficient budget we can. And unfortunately, to answer the question, which I think you already answered, we could cut services. And that's a real conversation that the community could have. I always joke the best way to fill up Rutherford Hall is to suggest cutting a service, and people come out, which is great because I love when people come and come to our meetings. But we're always open to ideas and suggestions, and the standard line, please email me and the board at mayor@scarsdale.com if you have suggestions.
Given the budget shortfall, which, is largely out of your control, is there any thought to increasing just fee schedules, like, building permit fees, things like that? And would that make any significant impact on the revenues coming in?
So we did take a serious look at increasing fees across the board last year in all departments. This year, because we had already taken such a comprehensive look last year, we really decided to only make increases and changes where either there's a direct increase in the cost to provide that service, or increase in cost of materials, or if it's the addition of new fees that correspond with recently made code changes. We had put together a proposed schedule in the budget materials on February 27th. We have those posted, and you'll see there's really not a whole lot of changes that are of significance being made this year, because we had done that larger increase last year.
If you look over the last 4 years, probably, if you had looked 5, 6 years ago, there was always a column of last date, modified, and you would have seen dates, going back quite a ways. There was an effort to really look at it from a few different ways. One would be CPI, one would be actual expenses, one was always increased for minimum wage and for employment increases. But also in terms of market, in terms of what the best alternative for residents, what other municipalities are doing, I think a lot more analysis has gone into that. So it's the first year I remember we're not making many changes, and I don't hear complaints from board members about doing more analysis because I think it's being done, and we'll continue to do it every year.
Okay, so maybe it's just this year. Okay. Let me think. So obviously there's a building moratorium currently, right? There's still one, right? How has that impacted revenues? Is that a significant or minor impact? on Village's revenues.
So, right now we are projecting to be slightly under budget with our building revenues. But there's a lot of factors that go into that, interest rates, inflation, so it's hard to pinpoint exactly what is from the moratorium. The moratorium only affects a small percentage of our permits. So, however, we are projected to have revenue above the prior year. So there is still growth from prior year.
Right, and also, it isn't, I mean, the correct term is the building moratorium, but as we all know, it's a modified building moratorium. There are plenty of exceptions of what can continue to happen. Also, these aren't perishable items. It isn't like, okay, so I don't renovate this now because I'm waiting to see what the code is. I'll never do it again. The village will never get the fees associated with it. So we may just see a reallocation of a lot of the fees, but I don't think we anticipate a great loss because of it.
Good. I think those are the primary questions that I had. I learned it. First of all, of course, thank you for taking this time, and more importantly, thank you for just such a thoughtful and collaborative budget process this year, and all the years. And I guess I would now ask my colleagues if there are questions from you guys.
Hi, so water rates, what's happening?
This budget,
How much are they going up by, in other words?
this budget is consistent with the model that we have in place. The rates are increasing 3%.
Okay. And no change in like, the different cutoffs?
Correct.
Right.
So there's some fee changes, right?
Fees that are changing that weren't contemplated as part of the study that Woodard and Curran had done as far as the tiered structures and the rates. There was an adjustment made to the base service rate.
No, right, I'm sorry, but weren't there service for the pipe size? Weren't there increases that we looked at?
Oh, yes, others, yes, there's, those are directly linked to the cost of the material in order to do those services such as changing out the pipe.
Right,
Yes.
but, hello, trustee Grant.
I
But-
didn't hear
As you are well aware, we instead of just having debates every year or every couple years, and then how many tiers should we have? What should the rate be? Having no visibility necessarily. Of course. So now we do have a model that isn't necessarily right. It doesn't have a crystal ball to know what the inputs should necessarily be and if the assumptions are correct, but we're always looking at it, modifying borrowing costs, putting in the cost of some of the materials when necessary and what the projects will actually cost. And the whole goal is not increasing more than we need to, but making sure we have enough money as it is an enterprise fund to pay for the needs. So, hopefully for residents, it will give visibility going forward, and every year it will be based on that. It won't just be, let's raise it, 20 cents this year because we think that's what we need. We kind of know what we need, again, based on current assumptions.
Last year, I know there was an issue with staffing. There's a shortage, there had been a shortage of staffing all over the municipalities. I'm curious where we are now.
I'm grateful to say that those large amounts of vacancies that we had due to the Great Resignation that really were impacting all municipalities in the area, we're not seeing the same level. Of course, there's going to be, staff turnover as it happens, but I'd say the majority of our key vacancies have been filled. But for the village manager position, which will be exciting to follow.
And I think there's a combination of, from other municipalities, it's not finding the people. It's also not investing enough in infrastructure, but also in people. And, you know, just quickly, Pittsburgh, if you want to go Google, it, if you haven't read it already, is a pretty good example. Their police department is no longer responding to certain complaints, certain calls. And that's something that's happening all around the country. That is something that I do not think would go over well in Scarsdale. And so it's just something to keep in mind about the need to keep investing in all that we do.
I have a question about communicating the budget process and the budget details to the community. So has your communication strategy changed at all since last year? And now with the demise of the Scarsdale Inquirer, that there's no longer any reporting, journalistic reporting of what's going on at the village board meetings. How are you adjusting to that gap, if at all?
I'm excited that you asked that question because something that we've done in the past couple of weeks, we've revived Scarsdale Official. If anyone remembers the Scarsdale Official newsletter, that was something that had started before my time with the village, and we've been bringing it back, and it's a great way to highlight the quick hits of what's going on in the village. And we want to include budget in that. We want to make sure that people are seeing important changes that are being discussed. We also had linked, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, the issue to ClearGov, so more people can go look at that amazing budget tool. I think a lot of people still unfortunately don't realize it's there, and it's just so fantastic. It has interactive maps. You can really see the detail of each fund. As I said before, you can see so much detail for the capital project. So we want to continue to get the word out about that, and we will continue to use the newsletter as another tool to have more widespread awareness about the budget process and other key projects that we have going on in the village. Sign up for this newsletter. So you go to the village website, scarsdale.com, go to notify me and sign up, and you'll be able to receive it.
So I totally get that, you can't address the storm weather, issue or stormwater issues until you know what the problems are, and obviously you have to wait for the reports and things like that. Are there any sort of knowns that you can address directly, or you have to wait for the report? And again, I also sort of, the second part of that is, and I know you don't know the timing of when the report's gonna come back, but do you anticipate it to happen in this next year, or it's really?
Yes,
Okay.
I sure hope so. And that's the expectation. And I think we do know some of the issues, and we are doing smaller projects always to try to fix those. On the bigger ones, it's not just about knowing where the problems are, it's knowing about how can we fix them, will it work, and what will the impact be? Because if there's a bottleneck, right, you know, it may be great, but it may do nothing at all. And the building moratorium, you know, a big part of it is actually to strengthen our codes, to try to keep in mind the impacts on storm. So hopefully that will have a positive impact, not immediately, but, you know, over a number of years.
Have you noticed, or is it too soon to notice the difference with the moratorium and whether that is actually happening?
For stormwater?
Yeah.
No, way too soon.
Are there any open union contracts? So which unions are still open?
We're currently negotiating with CSEN, which is all of our office employees, and our UFFA, which is our paid fire.
And I assume there are reserve, you know, there's money set aside in the budget, you know, because there are likely to be increased expenses. When it has anything else, I read about, well, I live on Fox Meadow Road, as you know, and read that the water and sewer lines have to be relocated for the gas line. Who's paying for that? Like, I'm sure we'll pay for it eventually in some form, but, you know, is the village stuck with that expense? Will Con Ed reimburse us? It sounds very complicated.
At our last village board meeting, we just had an MOU with Con Edison so that they can contribute to the cost of relocating that water and sewer infrastructure while they're doing work. And specifically, we had wanted this to be put in place because we've seen other instances where Con Ed might be doing work in an area, and because they're disturbing the soils which are around our water mains, it results in a water main break. And it's unfortunate that that occurs, but since the street's already being opened up, it's a great opportunity to take care of what's under there while it's opened. And that way, once it's paved over, we don't have to think about it for a while, it's sort of been replaced.
So what I'm hearing is that these are old pipes that have to be fixed anyway. But it's come to the forefront because of Con Ed's work. What kind of percentage are they giving us towards this, or,
They're paying for
or don't you know?
They're paying for it.
They are paying for it? That's great. Awesome.
But like you said, eventually we'll be paying for it
We'll all
somehow,
pay for it
but,
eventually.
but not today.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Obviously, you're still working out the issues with the budget, but do you know, what new positions are, or do you have any new positions that you are recommending? Yeah.
So overall, on this budget, our headcount is decreasing by 0.5. So we had an unfilled vacancy last year. We had created a public relations assistant position in the village manager's office. We were not able to fill that position, but we did create last year a part-time office assistant in the public works department. And we haven't been able to fill that either. That is really critical for help with some of the contract administration, help applying for grants. As you can see, we have a lot of capital needs, and we really want to take advantage and apply for grants wherever we can, but we haven't been able to fill that. And it could be for a variety of factors, but we think that one of the biggest contributors is the fact that it's part-time work and it's not necessarily attractive to those that are looking for that type of work, but full-time. And that is a position under civil service. So we are restricted in who that we could put in place. We would need someone from a list. So what we've done is we've taken, we're taking away that public relations assistant position, and we're reallocating some of that work to other staff in the manager's office. And we're increasing that part-time position in public works and making it a full-time position. So overall, it's a change, a net decrease in 0.5.
Over one more. Bingo. Last one though, the library pond project. I know that Friends of the Library has been raising money for that, but it's also part of our stormwater system, and what's like, who's paying for what? Are there any designs like beyond the schematic we saw from the Friends? This stormwater, the darn things polluted, those poor turtles have moss on their backs. What's going on?
So there's two different projects there. There's the larger library landscaping project, but specifically the pond improvements. The village is paying for, and we've already started the design work. A couple of months ago, I had a purchase order on my desk to get that work started. So I haven't seen the results of that design work yet, but that is in the process, and the village will be contributing for that.
So is it going to be dredged? Do you know, or is that too detailed a question?
Too soon to say at this point. I'd imagine there might be some dredging, but I won't actually know until we see the results of the design work that's recommended, so we can get started and actually doing the work.
That's great.
I'd be shocked if that isn't a big part of it.
Yeah, it hasn't been done in like forever and.
And also, the school district has a good amount of money allocated for dredging as you continue going south, I guess, from there, which probably will have some kind of an impact as well, because they have water issues and it needs to be dredged.
They need, if you look back several years ago, they were supposed to allow their buffer plants to grow, and they keep cutting them. That's been an issue forever, and that's why the water, is just so dirty once you get there. Have fun.
There's construction that's been going on for the longest time at the end of Heathcote Road, where 5 Corners is. And they have the road blocked to us, so what's going on?
We expect that to be wrapped up within the next month.
What?
We expect that to be finished within the next month.
Oh,
We're working on the.
they're working
Yes,
like
yes.
turtles.
Unfortunately, that's New York State. We don't have a lot of control over their pace.
Okay.
I just have a general question. I'm curious, what is the community engagement been with the budget? I know with the school, despite some major issues, I don't feel like people are paying attention. I'm wondering what kind, you've gotten a lot of letters, is there attendance at the meeting? What have you seen?
And honestly, I wish it was more. Usually you have certain interests, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but who come out in force on a certain topic. Or on, every year there's a group who want to use more borrowing and more fund balance. Otherwise, I'd like to believe in some way that people are happy. And we all try to do our own outreach to anyone who will listen, whether it's our neighborhood associations that all of us go to. I go to SNAP every month. We try to get input wherever we can, from the league, from, the forum. This year, I don't believe they have somebody specific for the budget process, but hopefully they'll continue to stay involved in some way. And again, mayor@scarsdale.com, and we read everything that we get, and we try to put it into perspective as to what the general community needs are.
So the work that was done with the cell tower and, do you feel like it's done? Do you have more plans to do more?
Good question. So specific to that. Or do you mind?
Oh, go ahead.
We actually had a meeting about this with Verizon recently, because when they first did the work and they calibrated it, it was great. We drove around and then something happened. No idea what happened, but we're getting more complaints now, I think, than we were getting before. So they're actively working on it. I think they were actually there yesterday. I don't know, have you heard anything?
I haven't gotten.
They sent
to
a
it
crew
yet.
to both locations yesterday. Maybe they're here now, actually, I wouldn't even know, but hopefully we'll see some improvements there. And then we are in talks with carriers to try to see, especially from a public safety standpoint, how we can improve coverage. And the goal, or at least the focus for now, is using existing infrastructure, not to set up new towers or new installations. And all of that will be discussed in public meetings, of course.
Any questions online? All right, well, I think that concludes our session. Again, I want to really thank you for your time. This was very informative and helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Recording is on us.